Welcome to the Freight Project Podcast, brought to you by CarrierLists, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management, technology, and solutions.
On today's The Freight Project Podcast episode, I welcome back for a third time Kevin Hill, co-founder and president of CarrierLists and director of research at FreightWaves, to talk about the new FreightWaves Pricing Power Index and all the various data points that go into this new index that shows if the market is more in a shipper's or a carrier's favor. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project Podcast. Well, hello, Kevin. Thanks for joining us once again on the Freight Project Podcast. This is your third time's a charm, being on the podcast. So we always love having you on because you're our numbers guy, our carrier guy. Now, as a reminder to our listeners, you are a co-founder of the company CarrierLists. You're the president now, still the co-founder. That doesn't change. And so you've built a really big active database full of carriers. You've removed the waste found in most carrier databases and a great partner to CarrierLists with this data. We're a customer of yours. So you've made an impression on the industry, an impression on us, and you're also now the director of research, doing a lot of analysis over at FreightWaves. And, you know, you've worked with the team on the release of a new index, the FreightWaves Pricing Power Index. But before we get into that, I always like to get an update with guests. Can you first tell us a bit about how CarrierList is doing and if there's any new updates our listeners should know there? And maybe give a bit of information about your new role as the Director of Research at FreightWaves.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's always a pleasure to be on your podcast. And also to CarrierLists, a great customer of CarrierLists. A little over a year, you guys have been active with us, and it's been great. CarrierLists is doing great. So some of our updates that we've been doing, we've been going over and recalling our database of about 27,000 carriers now. We touch base with them at least once a year. To see if anything's changed. We get the kind of trailers they run, you know, whether it's flatbed, reefer, van, what their preferred lanes are, see if that's changed at all. We've been getting dispatchers' names, and we always get updated emails and phone numbers. So our customers can just dial right in to dispatch or sales or whoever they need to talk to look for capacity and to book trucks. So it's been going great. I still have a call center in Oklahoma that making calls every single day and sells people out selling. And about 5 months ago, I got hooked up with FreightWaves, got a great opportunity to come over and be director of research and really investigate everything in trucking, freight, and logistics. You know, how the spot market interacts with the contract market. Doing valuations of the brokerage industry, the freight brokerage or 3PL industry, and getting more into the financials and also leading indicators of the market. And it's a great company over here. It's a great platform, Sonar. And I think probably everyone's familiar with FreightWaves.com and the really great near-time, real-time stories that they publish on a daily basis that helps everyone in the market stay on top of the game.
Well, that's good. You know, and so you've been working on, you know, a lot of, you know, good quantitative and qualitative data. What are you guys kind of working on? What other kind of content are you putting out there that you are working on currently with that team that's doing a lot of research?
Sure. We have a couple surveys that we're working on at the moment. Right now, we just finished up a survey for the Women in Trucking Association. Right. So getting some
cool
information for them. We had a great response rate to the FreightWaves readers, and that will be published very soon. Probably by the time the podcast airs, we'll have that out and published. A study that we're doing that's really interesting as well is trying to quantify the relationship between spot prices and contract prices. And when spot rates rise above contract and pulls contract up, what's the magnitude and the duration of that raise? So if spot rates go up 20 or 30% above contract, how long does it take before shippers need to use the spot market more to find capacity that's being rejected on the contract side? And like we have right now, where spot rates are considerably lower than contract rates, what percentage of freight are they putting out on the spot market to capture those reduced costs of the spot market, and just how they interact with that, and how the spot market moves the contract market up and down on a lag. So those are two things that we're doing. We're also doing some other surveys. We're doing a fleet manager survey to figure out utilization. We started an insurance renewal survey as well, and that gauges what insurance companies are seeing when companies or trucking fleets renew their policies. If you're running 100 trucks and your renewals are for 105 trucks, then you have a 5% increase. If it's for 95%, then you have a 5% decrease. And in aggregate, we can get more near-time numbers on if capacity is entering the market or leaving the market. So those are a few of the projects we're working on right now in our group.
Wow. That's just an insane amount of data. When I came into the industry, I don't know if that really existed. Was still, and at least back then and still now in some respects, but you all are really working with that along with some other data type companies out there, to really bring some better insights to the marketplace, to make better decisions, and really it's good for all of us, right? It really helps us plan better. It helps the economy at large. It helps with capacity utilization, profitability for truckers, great experiences for shippers who are able to kind of, get more stability thanks to this data. And I just think we're going to see a heck of a lot more of that. And in fact, some of those data points might be driving what we're here to talk about today, the FreightWaves Power Pricing Index. So first and foremost, this new Pricing Power Index, I saw it this week, so I wanted to have you on. What is it? What is the FreightWaves Pricing Power Index in your own words?
So it's an idea that Craig Fuller, our CEO and founder, came up with and mentioned to us and had us run with this. And what it is, it's analyzing all these different data points in a very holistic way to figure out who has the power in pricing negotiations, right? So it's a very supply and demand market. When there's more capacity than freight, you see dips like we were seeing in 2019. On the flip side, in 2018, it was completely reversed, where you had a lot of demand for freight and tight capacity. So this pendulum or gauge moves constantly. So we're looking at all different kinds of traditional data sources and also alternative data sources to really come together and kind of like the college football committee for the playoffs, come up and assign a number every week based on what we're seeing in the market and also who we're talking to as well through our surveys and channel checks. So some of the things that we use are outbound volumes, tender rejection rates. We look at the spot market. We look at the contract rates and what that trend is really doing. We look at our freight futures forward curve as well. And then we look at a lot of economic and regulatory data. So anything that's on the horizon, we kind of assign a weighted number to that. And also critical events, which is a lot of times like weather, like we saw with Dorian, that kind of disrupted the freight markets on the East Coast as it rolled through the Bahamas, and we weren't quite sure where it was going to hit or how strong it's going to be. So events like that on a week-to-week basis kind of shift the balance of power. And our goal is to track that. And over the next 3 or 6 months, we'll start assembling a nice time series data set that we can include in Sonar as a graph. And it has a nice power for whether you're a 3PL, a carrier, a shipper, to know really quickly what the market's doing And if you're going in to do some rate negotiations or talk with customers or talk with vendors, it's a tool that you can put in your slide deck. You can use it to frame a conversation. Whether you have the upper hand or lower hand, it's really good information to have.
Yeah, I was at a conference recently, and I think one of the main things, or two big themes I heard, and maybe a third which is related, was collaboration in the industry, true partnerships. So the idea of bringing people back to the equation, although focusing on technology is important, at the end of the day, it is about people. And I think inherent in both of those, in order for them to really work, it has to involve data. And it has to involve actionable data, and it has to involve data that is the truth. And so that way parties can come together, and it's not a zero-sum game or an anecdotal, emotional experience. It's really just around what we're seeing in the data. And then you can kind of strip away, whatever preconceived notions you might have or assumptions, and really get to the truth of the matter and say, hey, look, I love you as a great partner. We're seeing this. Is there something we can improve to get these numbers better and work together? And hopefully that's where things are going. And I think, some of the other indexes that exist out there, whether it be ISM's manufacturing index or, load boards or DATs, look at the market. How are shippers, or how is the industry supposed to look at the FreightWaves Pricing Power Index? How is it different from those indexes?
It's that holistic view of the market, right? So the ISM measures something once a month that's usually on a lag, and there's singular data points. So if you roll all of those up into a very holistic view from A to Z of the market, that's what we do, and that's really how it's different. And it's not a quantitative number that we put on it at the end of the day. It is based on quantitative data that resides in Sonar, that resides in government data, that resides in what DAT and Truckstop publish as well. Certainly spot rates are at a natural low right now, a natural low point where you're tipping down into the operational cost per mile. So we can take that into account. We can take what the Fed is doing in account. We can look at trucking companies and kind of their guidance and their earnings and what they've published. We can take from financial institutions, the investment banks, those research reports that they publish. We have access to quite a bit of those. So we take those, and it's just really a holistic view. And of course, we have the futures market, so we can see what the financial players, the hedgers, are expecting over the next 3, 6, 9, up to 16 months. So we can take all of that into our analysis, and we can sit around and discuss it, and we place a number on it.
Yeah, tell me more about those numbers. Is it complicated? Is it something a data scientist needs to be involved in? Can the average Joe look at this index and come away understanding what it means?
Yes, the average Joe can. So it's not highly quantitative. There's no algorithms involved in it. It is taking everything in the news cycle, everything that we have in Sonar, just outbound volumes. What's the trend in outbound volumes? And what are the economic policies that might affect that, right? So trade wars, tariffs, cutting interest rates, the 10-year bond, inversions in bond yields. Seth Holm, who works in our group, came from a hedge fund, so he understands that perfectly well. And that is kind of his point of expertise. Mine's in capacity. We have others that are more in the carrier game, the shipper game. And we're able to take data points that are out there in various locations, and we just consolidate that for the reader. So you have it all in one nice short article with a gauge. And it's something that if you're selling freight brokerage, right, you can get on the phone and have those as talking points. And it makes you a little bit of a market expert. especially if your prospects haven't read the PPI, right? And if you're a carrier, same thing. And if you're a shipper, right, it just gives you all that information right where you need it to be able to go out and interact with customers and vendors.
Yeah, I can tell you, people love, especially prospects. I'm in marketing. You have a company that you have a sales part aspect of your life as well. And when you can lead with data or expertise like that, an informed position, you instantly get them to see that, hey, this person's not here to sell me, quote unquote, or hoodwink me. They're really here to help me. And this is what they're seeing. And they truly perhaps can because they're in the game. So I do see this as a valuable tool. I know for us as a TMS provider with our managed transportation management services, it's key that the shippers and even our carrier partners are feeling, with us being in the middle, that they have a competent player who's really looking at all sides and advocating for each, because truly we're not effective unless we can bring both parties to the table and talk around a shared set of data, that is, in front of us that we can then use to say, what are we trying to achieve? And based on the data, what's the direction in which we want to go? So it's really key to get these kind of indexes, and it's really key to not be confused by them too, right? That it's usable. So I'm glad to hear that it is, and that any average Joe can go in there and say, okay, I can get some insights from this. So you've had a couple of weeks of the Pricing Power Index now. So what are some of the things you're initially seeing from the data? Are there any trends that would lead you to make any predictions from that data?
Yeah, and I totally glossed over the most important differentiator, right, is that it's forward-looking, right? So what we're doing is forward-looking, some of the data that we're compiling, especially with insurance policy renewals, trying to define early predictors on capacity. So everything's forward-looking. We're putting in more analysis every week and creating new data sets to do that with. So it is all about predicting the market, right? So we published it yesterday. Was our second weekly, and we're going to do that on a weekly basis on Thursdays going forward. But we sort of so it's. Shippers start at 0, and then 50 is the midway point, is dead even. Each player has equal balance of power of pricing power, right? And then over to 100 is the gauge, right? So over to 100 is the carrier's number, right? So we started at 35, which is tilted towards shippers. This week it was 45. Based on some data that we have that indicates that capacity might finally be leaving the market. Also, spot rates are going to be coming up over the next few months as the spread between contract, or as we call them, paper rates here, paper rates and spot. So contract's going to move down, and it has been trending down. Spot rates are going up, so there's a squeeze in the margin there. But I think that cycle is well underway. So over the next 3 or 6 months, I think the market is going to tighten on the capacity side. And that's just everything that we see coming in. Trade talks are resuming, and it seems like there's some really positive news in the last few days on that. We'll probably see another rate cut, so demand will increase, capacity will tighten, and I'm thinking for carriers that they're going to get a little bit more power as we move into 2020.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we're in the 9th month of the year. Last September, November, so a year ago, was pretty tight in capacity. The spot market eases up a little bit this year. The shippers have a little bit more leverage. I'm sure they enjoyed that. I think they needed it. I don't know if I could be a shipping manager. That's a tough job. So good for them. But the reality is that it can swing back, right? And relatively speaking, 9 months to a year is not a long period of time. And I think it's key, that shippers especially, and that's kind of where my mind's at from the perspective of Cerasis, they never want to get trapped in a place where they feel like, oh my goodness, I feel like I can just, because of the swings in the market this month, I don't need help and I'm good using maybe one or two carriers. And then when the capacity or things get tight again, it kind of leaves them in a bad spot, and any more data that they can see that's forward looking, like you're providing here in this index, will really help them start to see that, really what I need to do is stabilize my freight operations for the long term that are sustainable, no matter if the PPI from FreightWaves is in my favor and it's more of a 35, or if it's at 80 in 7 months, and it could be right on the carrier side. The reality is that these people, both sides, and including our role as a middleman freight broker 3PL who provides technology to kind of guide those parties together and say, look, it's not about necessarily who's in favor or what. We need to understand those data points. The reality is that we just need to stabilize our relationships so all parties are able to be sustainable. And that's kind of, I assume, one of the main goals of introducing this pricing index, right?
You're
Kevin?
exactly right, Adam. It's one of the main goals. The market is highly volatile. And just because you have the pricing power and you can negotiate better rates, we've seen this in 2019 as well. It's like shipper of choice has kind of fallen off the radar for a lot of people. We've seen dwell times and detention times increase, but that market's going to turn. It always does, and I think the average freight recession is between 7 and 18 months, right? And as you said, we're about 9-10 months into this one. And I think we are seeing the recovery. And once you see the recovery, actors on both sides, or all three sides really, right? Shippers, 3PLs, and carriers as well, is that, you need to always keep prospecting. And that's, on the carriers and 3PL side, that's sales, right? But on the shipper side, you always need to be prospecting for carriers and for 3PLs to find the capacity when that turns. And sometimes that's not a long-term turn. Sometimes it's a critical event. Sometimes it's a regulatory burden that is short-term. But those crunches come and you feel a lot of pain from that. All parties do. And it's really finding a very good diversified base to move your freight.
Well, and since you're kind of speaking about, that forward-looking index, and you have that entire research team there at FreightWaves looking at so many different data points, do you guys have any insight into maybe where things are going in 2020? Obviously, 2019 wasn't a bad year. It was just not when you compare a year like 2018 to 2019, it's like, like Mark McGuire hitting 61 or 67 home runs in a year, and then the next year only hitting 60. Yeah, he's got less home runs, but he still hit a lot of home runs. So it's not like 2019 was bad, but any insight into 2020 as we, are only, 3.5 months away?
So
yeah,
right?
When you say it like that,
months,
right?
Christmas will be here very soon. So I think that we're moving through the overcapacity cycle. It's starting to pick up, I think. I think especially when we were looking at it a few months ago, we saw spot rates very depressed, and we're like, oh, people are going to get out of the market. People are getting out of the market. trucks are going to, either go bankrupt or slim down. The used truck market is going to lose value in used trucks. Those values will go down as well. And I think we missed what really causes the cycle to turn, and that's the huge part of the market, which is contract. So that's about 80% of the trucking market. Spot market's only about 20%. And now that I think in July was the first year that the contract renewals for carriers turned negative over 2018. And I think we're going to see that in government data, the PPI, the long distance truckload, this next month when it gets released. And I think once contract rates start going down, that's when the real pain starts to happen. And I think that's happening right now. And I think we saw that in the insurance renewal data, that people are reducing their fleet size. They're reducing their truck counts. There's some unprofitable assets out there. So they're going to trim that down. I think capacity is going to leave the market, and 2020 is going to be a more normal year. It's going to be probably better than 2017. Certainly not as good as 2018, but rates are going to tighten up. It's going to be a more normal market. And one thing that we are really watching out for, and it's just right now starting to take effect, is IMO 2020, which a lot of people haven't heard of because it's a marine or ocean vessel type of regulation through the UN to burn ultra low sulfur fuels. And right now, most ships will burn high sulfur fuels. So that changeover becomes mandatory on January 1st, 2020. And what you make these very low sulfur fuels out of is the same middle distillate that you make diesel from, and jet fuel as well. So you're going to see a huge demand come in for those feedstocks, which should make diesel prices pretty volatile. Might see a sharp increase, especially in the beginning, as everyone adjusts to this new market. And it could even become a new normal where the spread between gasoline and diesel increases even further. So you might have 25 cents more on average for the price of diesel. And all of this is relative to the price of oil, right? So if oil goes down, you're probably not going to feel it as much, but it's going to be a long-term cost increase for trucking. And I don't know how that's going to distort the market, but it's something that everyone out there should certainly keep their eye on.
Yeah. And I think it just it just really reinforces the point of stabilization by shippers and carriers, and looking at the data is one way to get to stabilization. So that way, and in warehouse management, right, they call it waveless picking. So you don't see any, spikes or lulls in your picking, that you can stabilize it. And so you can be more consistent, make better use of your resources, which at the end of the day, improves bottom lines and a company's EBITDA. So it's that important, and you have to be able to look at the data to get there. And so with that said, before I let you go, Kevin, I want to make sure our listeners know where to find the FreightWaves Power Pricing Index, or Pricing Power Index. I apologize. Where can they find that
Power
each week?
Index is published every Thursday afternoon on FreightWaves.com. You'll see a picture of a gauge on there. So that's a good indication, and our number that we pick. And when you open that up, you'll see all of our analysis, about a paragraph for each category that we've looked at and that we think are the most important for that week and for the next few weeks. So you can keep track of that on FreightWaves.com.
Excellent. Well, be a smart shipper and a smart carrier and go check that out. I'd also encourage everybody to always look at their own data. And if they're not tracking data, get some mechanism to track that as well, so you can match it to what the larger industry is seeing. Kevin Hill of CarrierLists, Director of Research of FreightWaves. Man, thanks again. Third time on the Freight Project podcast. Our listeners are smarter because you were here.
Thank you very much, Adam.
Today.
It's always a pleasure coming on and talking with you.
All right. And for all of our listeners out there of the Freight Project podcast,